Straight to the top, never going down, don't wait for the drop. Stand still, that's the motto, yeah. Brand new bands for the auto, oh. Foot to the ground, full throttle. Big energy for the night like lotto. Y'all talk lots, never this quiet. Life like a Seinfeld plot. Vault full of songs, all of them bombs. Something like a minefield guy. Boom. Get it, tickets running out quick. Bet it, never get it out big. Said it, never had to shout it. They said I couldn't never do it, okay, how's it? Fit a week worth of work in a minute. Machine well oiled, you know how I stay efficient. To-do list written, I do this different. Hold up, wait a minute, I ain't finished. Look, flows the same now. Paved the way, the snakes and fakes are chased out. Back to back to back, I changed the pace now. Had to stack the cash until the bank's out. Straight to the top, never going down, don't wait for the drop.
Copilot is revolutionizing our creative workflows.
It's helping us reimagine a company. It's been in business for years.
Copilot for Microsoft 365 helps us move faster.
It makes us more agile in really finding the right information.
Microsoft Copilot gives our employees more power, more freedom to focus on our mission, health for all and hunger for none.
Copilot now is helping us tell the story behind the data.
It is automating, it is prompting, it is imagining, it is creating.
Copilot gives our people the gift of time. If we can give our sellers back 4 hours a week, it's worth $50 million in annual revenue, and that is math that matters.
It's not a question if you should adopt Copilot, but when. And I can give you the answer to when. It's now.
Hey everyone, and welcome. Hey, I'm Stephen Lauber, CEO and founder of Trailhead, and I'm really glad you're here today. Whether you're joining us live or catching the replay, thanks for making some time to explore something that's reshaping the way we work. We're going to take a practical look at what Copilot is, how it is showing up in the tools that you already use, and what it means for your business. You'll see our agenda up on the screen now. We'll start with a quick look at the moment we're in. AI has come to work, so what now? And then from there, we'll break down what Copilot actually is, and then talk about the real business impact of generative AI. And then after that, we'll touch on AI literacy and adoption, because knowing how to use these tools is just as important as having access to them. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some options and next steps to help you move forward with confidence. But a quick introduction. As I said, I'm Stephen Lauber, CEO of Trailhead. We are a technology and managed intelligence firm located here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And we help companies modernize with confidence through safe and efficient cloud and AI solutions. So before we dive into Copilot, I want to point you to a recent webinar that we did on the risks of AI. It lays the foundation for why tools like Copilot are not just helpful, but necessary. In that session, we explored the real-world challenges, ethical considerations, and potential pitfalls of AI adoption. Understanding those risks will give you a clearer picture of why Copilot was built the way it was and how it helps you navigate those complexities with confidence. It's a great lead into today's content if you haven't seen it. You can scan the QR code or head over to trailheadit.com/AI risk if you'd like to watch that full recording. So I want to start off with a quote from the science fiction writer William Gibson, which is that the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed yet. So this isn't a new quote. It's been around for a while. But I do think that it applies now more than ever before. We are living through breakthrough after breakthrough, but The rate at which we ourselves as people get to actually touch those breakthroughs, that varies a lot. See, some people are going to get to interact with this new technology much earlier than others, and it's up to us to make sure that they are not left behind as this development continues. The fact that you're here today at this webinar proves that you have not been living under a rock this last year, and so you'll have some seen how generative AI has taken the world and really the entire global financial markets by storm. It's now integrated into everyday life for many of us. And ChatGPT is the fastest growing piece of technology that we've ever seen. And it'll not even be the fastest ever, because odds are that we're going to see some things come along in the future, maybe in the near future, that will be even faster. So things are happening really quickly right now. And on that note, the technology that we'll be discussing today is also evolving rapidly. So we've seen major updates come to Copilot continuously every few weeks over the past few months. And that shows no signs of slowing down anytime soon. But please keep in mind, everything we're going to talk about here today, it's based off of current capability. It's not based off of those kinds of future theoretical capabilities. It's very much here and now. In fact, in a lot of cases, probably most cases, it's based on an even more limited feature set than what we have today, because things have been progressing at a rapid pace since these conclusions were reached. So if anything, we're going to be undervaluing what we're going to talk about here today. Some new features really that have been added to Copilot recently. We've gotten voice recognition added to Teams, which will help with Copilot transcription when you're in a room with multiple people. We've got an interpreter added to Teams, which is it's an AI feature that's going to be able to let you speak just about any language and get that interpreted to the language of the other speakers in real time. And these videos here are from Sora, and that's an OpenAI video generation model that was recently added to Copilot as well. Next up, I'm going to show you some stats from Microsoft's Work Trend Index. This was a study of 31,000 professionals operating in 31 different countries across the globe. So they were surveyed by Microsoft, and they got some really interesting conclusions out of that. For example, one of the big findings, I think arguably one of the most interesting findings, is that AI is already here. It's already being used at work. And that as many as 75% of the people, or at least 75% of the people who responded to the survey, were already using AI at work at the time of that survey. You know, those people, 78% were not actually using AI tools that have been provided to them officially by their employer or by their IT department or their MSP. You know, they might be using free online AI tools, tools that don't necessarily safeguard proprietary company data. So shadow AI, it's a very real thing that we are dealing with right now. And one conclusion, somewhat troubling from this, is that 68% of surveyed employees felt they didn't have the time or the energy needed to do their job properly. 46% of them felt burnt out. So we're in a new era where digital debt is very costly to us in terms of innovation and business momentum. But the good news is that AI can have a really huge impact on this challenging workplace that we find ourselves in. See, these numbers we see here are from Forrester's study called the Total Economic Impact of Microsoft Copilot for SMB. So it's an SMB-focused study, and they found some really promising results in terms of potential revenue and cost benefits here. But I want to draw your attention to the things on the right side here, which is increasing employee satisfaction in this, it's really new challenging work environment. That is, though, if we as leaders can manage to keep up with the pace of the change in front of us, and that is a tall order. See, 79% of leaders believe that AI is critical to stay competitive, but the majority still say that they don't have a plan or vision on how to implement this. So hopefully we're going to start to building that kind of clarity. So it's fair to say that many of us were caught off guard by this rapid advancement of AI in the workplace. But it's really important that we realize that this wave is not out there. It's far away on the horizon. It's breaking right on top of our heads right now. And some of us are going to sink, some of us are going to swim, and some of us are going to take a look at that really big wave, and we're not going to see a challenge. We're going to see an opportunity, and we're going to grab our boards and we're going to go out there and surf. And if you want to surf, it makes sense to take a look at what kinds of boards are available out there, right? So we're here to talk about one of those today, and that's Microsoft 365 Copilot. And while the Copilot landscape, it's complex because the Microsoft landscape is complex. Many of you will know this from experience, so it can be helpful to try and simplify things and take them step by step. So the way we can define Copilot is it's Microsoft's generative AI interface. Let's take that step by step. So obviously it's Microsoft service, but it is the main way in which you will interact with Microsoft technology, both existing tech and future tech. So you've got the Microsoft CEO, Satya Nadella, up on stage at their Ignite conference, proclaiming that they are the Copilot company now. It's going to be integrated into every single Microsoft experience there is. Then generative AI, moving on to the next step, that's a term that it gets used a lot these days, and you'll have seen it all over the place. What I want you to focus on with this part is the word generative, right? Let's try and keep this in mind for the rest of this presentation. So this generative, in the sense that it's open-ended. It's not deterministic in the sense, that a developer has sat down and coded an app to have a button. And then when user A clicks button A, action B happens exactly the same way, exactly every time, regardless of context. Use cases for this kind of open-ended solution are going to be discovered by us end users as much as they are going to be told or taught to us. See, I could hand you a book of prompts right now, and it wouldn't be very useful to you. First off, because you probably wouldn't read it. And second off, because it wouldn't be relevant to you necessarily. It'll be generic. See, when you discover ways to use generative AI in your workflow that's integrated into your context and the way that you do your work, that's when it actually becomes powerful and useful to you for real. And then finally, interface. What we need to realize with this is that a human is very much still in the loop, right? It's a co-pilot. It's not an autopilot. Now, Microsoft, they're pushing agents a lot more. And will even be more so in the future. But agents are going to be directed and instructed through an interface, and that interface is Copilot. So for agents, for existing Microsoft tech, Copilot is the generative AI interface that we use to interact with that technology. So let's look at how this works in practice. So you've got a large language model, and you've got Copilot sitting alongside of it, and you're going to prompt Copilot, and you're going to ask a question, you're going to make a request. Copilot's going to take that information from your work context and put it together with that prompt and feed all of that information into the large language model. And then the model is going to respond, and Copilot is going to make things happen as a result of that response. It can be generating new stuff, maybe new content, new text, and could be making things happen inside of the app that you're in, depending on what your prompt is and depending on what capabilities. So the thing that Copilot uses to provide context and work context to your prompts is the Microsoft Graph. If you're not familiar with what the Microsoft Graph is, you can think of it as that umbrella term for all of the things going on in your user environment, in your Microsoft tenant at work. So it's your user information, it's your chats with coworkers, maybe with external people inside of your tenant, your meetings, your calendar, your emails and files like OneDrive and your SharePoint and such. See, Copilot has access to that and is able to keep that in mind to make responses make sense in your work context. So this all seems a bit abstract still, though, right? There's a lot of jargon and a lot of terminology around generative AI that's being thrown around. And it can be helpful to take a closer look at what actually makes up a service like Copilot, or indeed other AI tools that are out there. Fundamentally speaking, these services are really just a large language model that's been given access to data and deployed inside of a context. So that model in this case is GPT and DALL-E and other models from OpenAI. They're algorithms that have been trained on large amounts of content and data. And then they're thus able to make connections between the prompts that you give the model and what the output should look like. So it's able to interpret what you write to it, look inside of its vast corpus of knowledge that is gained from its training, and then based off your input, it's able to conclude that, oh, hey, you want to write a job description. Well, job descriptions typically look like this, and then it builds that step by step to build an output. I mean, I'm simplifying here, but on a broad level, it's sort of how a large language model works here. So these are models from OpenAI. They are generative, i.e. open-ended, they're non-deterministic. They're most definitely among the absolute industry-leading models out there. But let's not get into discussions about who is the absolute top. You will get as many different answers on that as we have people. But the point is that these are ever evolving and new models, they get released, and then Microsoft then implements those models into Copilot, largely because of their very close collaboration and indeed ownership stake in OpenAI. So a new model that comes out, and then there's a slight delay because Microsoft is going to adapt that. They're going to adapt it to their security-minded implementation of Copilot. We'll be covering that in just a second, but then that will be made available as a capacity boost inside of Copilot. So that's your large language model, right? It can answer questions or produce content or generate content based off of what it knows. But that is a static thing, all right? Its knowledge base for the model itself does not change. When we interact with a service like this, every single interaction we do does not update and change the model. What a provider of this can do is that they can gather that data and they can use that as training data to the next version of their model, because the training is done as a separate process. Now, Microsoft doesn't do that, all right? That's a big differentiation with Copilot versus a lot of AI apps and solutions that are out there. Is that Microsoft does not take the data that you provide it and use that to develop the base models or to develop the service. We'll be covering that in just a second. But that data then is the context. It is your company and your employee data. That's available inside your Microsoft environment. So that Microsoft Graph we talked about that contains things like SharePoint, OneDrive, and your whole sort of Microsoft tenant. And so it's able to make conclusions based off of what your work context is. And then finally, it's made available to you inside of a context, and that context is your Microsoft 365 tenants, your environment, your applications. Copilot is securely deployed inside of that tenant. And that means that your IT controls, what it does and who has access to it and such. You can access it from inside the Microsoft apps that you use. So you don't have to open up your web browser and go to copilot.microsoft.com. You have it right there in front of you in Word and PowerPoint and Outlook and Teams and so on. And it's integrated into those apps so that it can make things happen inside of them, not just generate text. But the way this is implemented in the case of Copilot is different from how a lot of other AI solutions are built. So let's take a closer look at that. Let's compare Copilot to what many other AI tools on the market have in terms of their setup. It can be helpful to look at what those major differences are, because we alluded to the fact that Copilot is a very security-minded and security prioritizing solution compared to the others. They might be prioritizing recency and innovation in terms of like the most cutting edge results, but there are always trade-offs in these situations, aren't there? So we talked about how Copilot is not a learning model. I cannot emphasize that part enough. See, Microsoft has policies in place that make sure that they don't use your data to train and improve models or to improve their service in this case. That data that happens inside of your interaction with Copilot, that actually gets wiped clean with every new session. So there, that has trade-offs in terms of Copilot not having the same kind of memory, but it also means that Microsoft can't use that information to profile you, which arguably some services or many services out there are able to do, especially if they're free, right? So if something is free, it's free for a reason. And because Copilot lives inside of your Microsoft 365 tenant, that means that any security measures that you've implemented for that tenant also apply to Copilot. So it's inside of that secure, controlled environment that you have a say over. By contrast, then, a lot of the other AI tools, they do actually allow the vendor to train their model on data that you give that service, or submit to it in the form of files or prompts or what have you for information. And that applies even if it is sensitive, proprietary information. And the session data for prompts that you give to that AI tool, that can theoretically be used to profile you, to profile your company and such. For example, for the purpose of serving you ads. Is this always the case? No, of course not. But if you read the terms and service for a lot of these tools, often in a lot of cases, there is not much preventing them from doing so. Okay, so be very aware of what it is that you are using or what you are allowing your teammates or your colleagues to use when it comes to work environments and especially sensitive data. Finally, most of these tools are made available inside of a web app. A third-party web app that the vendor has built. But as a result of that, that's an app and an environment that they control, right? You might not know what difference, factors are being tracked or what data is being gathered inside of that environment or how secure that environment is. So the biggest single differentiator for Microsoft 365 Copilot is that it's designed from the ground up to work for work. It's designed for a work environment, a work context first and foremost. Most other systems out there have been designed for a consumer user first, and then work use added as an extra later on. Not so with Copilot. And that's why Copilot is so closely hooked into your IT environment. It's because it's going to be that user interface for AI. Microsoft has now coined this term for Copilot being the UI for AI. It's part of a broader system for data access and governance for management of agents and different ways we interact with AI behind the scenes, and also measurement and analytics. And all of that comes together into what's called the Copilot control system. So that's a system that you and your IT department, they have control over as opposed to a lot of other solutions that you just use. So it is that UI for interacting with Microsoft technology. And on that note, we mentioned agents. We've been talking quite a bit about agents here, but we're not going to focus too deeply on that in this session here today, but I'll briefly address what agents are, because this is where we are headed with this whole movement right now. Looking at the latest developments in the products and services coming out on the market, not least from Microsoft. So agents are going to be a little bit further ahead of most of us in attendance today. And I would recommend not biting off too much at once when you're getting started with AI, but it's good to know where you're going. So what are agents? Agents, in a simplified way, are specialized AI entities. You could say they operate based off of instructions that you give them. And in some cases, and especially in the future, they're going to be also running autonomously without you having to prompt them every single time. And what these agents have in common is that they can take information, they can gather information, they can make things happen inside of your IT environment or your app environment. You have agents that are information based, that are going to be based off of finding and processing and interpreting information and then conveying that to you. You're also going to have agents that have tasks and actions to them, right? You can make things happen inside of workflows and other systems, and pretty soon they'll even be able to operate completely autonomously. As you set them on a path, they'll be able to make things happen behind the scenes too, but Copilot is the way that you are going to interact with these as we've been over. So in the very near future, we may well have a situation where every single business process that we have has an agent involved to help us handle that process in a better way. And Microsoft has given you and your MSP, your IT service provider, they've given them the tools to build those agents right now. And there's also a large and growing spectrum of different agents that are built by Microsoft and are being rolled out, as well as third-party agents from vendors like Adobe. But bringing things back to the here and now, what matters now is that the interface that you're going to be using to interact, to orchestrate how these agents work in the day-to-day, that's going to be Copilot, okay? So even without using a single agent, even if agents did not exist, everything else we're going to be discussing moving forward today is going to apply. So we're focusing on Copilot, but keep in mind that this is also, on top of what we're discussing here, going to be the way in which you interact with agents in the near future. So where do we start off with this? So I mentioned how Copilot is being integrated into everything, and that doesn't just mean one Copilot, because things are never simple and easy when it comes to technology like this, right? There are a lot of different Copilots. Some of them are in different price plans, some of them on different licensing terms. Some are free and included, and some are not. So I want to try and set our focus on where it's the best place to start. And then there are many good ways to branch out later on, but where does it make sense to start your journey with Copilot and with generative AI for a work context? And that place to start is Microsoft 365 Copilot. But I also want to mention that there is an in-between step, so that you can actually already have something you already have access to right now, and that's called Copilot Chat. And these two, they're the starting point for the Microsoft journey. And why do I say that? Well, it comes down to AI literacy, building up the fluency to interact with AI technology for you, your teams, and your workplace, and your entire organization. And that takes a bit of time and it takes a bit of work. So starting with a hyper specialized AI is not the most sure way to achieve success in this, if you want to achieve AI adoption across your entire organization. Think about it this way. When we moved from using paper and typewriters to using computers, we all needed to sort of rewire the way we work and the way we think about work. We couldn't necessarily apply the exact same way of thinking to our work context when that context changed. And we're facing the same kind of paradigm shift here as well. The difference here is that nobody is taking away our paper and pen. We still have our paper and pen right in front of us. So even more important is keeping focus and making sure that we have intentionality of getting people up to speed on this, because nobody's taking away your ability to work manually. So we're going to have to really put some effort into helping people rewire the way they think about doing work tasks. And that's going to take a bit of work. So that's why I talk about AI literacy, and we'll be going into that a little bit more in just a second. But imagine you're jumping straight from working purely analog, just on paper, directly towards coding an app. That jump is not going to work particularly well, and it's only going to be relevant to some people, right? Not all of us build apps. And in fact, most of us probably don't build apps. So we need to walk before we can run. And by learning to walk, we realize that, oh, hey, what kind of a runner am I going to be? And am I going to be a sprinter? Maybe I'm going to be a long distance runner or even a hurdler. But before I've learned to walk, it's much more difficult for me to understand where I'm headed, all right? So we start with something, and that is relevant to every single worker. And that's Copilot Chat. So what's the difference between these two? Copilot Chat, the solution that you all have access to right now, if you go to copilot.microsoft.com and you log in with your work account, so this step is very, very important. Make sure you're logged in with the work Microsoft 365 account, and you'll see a little shield icon on your screen in one of the corners. If you hover over that, it's going to say Enterprise Data Protection, and I'll show you this in the demo coming up. That means that your session data is not being saved. Microsoft, they've applied terms of service for that, which means that they do not use any of that data that you provide to Copilot to improve their service at all. So you can think of this as your secure alternative to a lot of other free AI solutions out there. You already have access to it, and it also uses the web as its context for answering information or for gathering information and providing grounding to supplement what the model itself already knows. By contrast, Microsoft 365 Copilot, it's that, but it's also able to work grounding that we talked about, using your Microsoft Graph and your work environment. It also has AI chat and commanding of apps, like making things happen inside of apps like Excel or inside of those Microsoft 365 apps. So it's not just a web-based solution. These two then are somewhat different when it comes to pricing. So Microsoft 365 Copilot is a paid license, whereas Copilot Chat is free if you're on a Microsoft 365 business setup. The difference between them goes a bit further than with agents, and this is the last time I'm going to be mentioning agents for this, because we want to focus on this core solution of Copilot here and now. But the difference with pricing here also comes into play because agents are available in Copilot Chat, and there is the ability to hook in more agents for that later on, but they are going to be billed based off of usage, all right? Which makes them a little bit unpredictable in terms of what an agent is going to cost. Whereas if you are a user, you have a Microsoft 365 Copilot license, then any agents that you use inside of that context do not cost anything extra. You can prompt agents as many times as you want, and it's not going to lead to any more costs being incurred. So that's a big difference. So what capabilities does Copilot have then? We talked about how this is a open-ended and that it's important to keep in mind, but I realize I need to give you some examples and something to illustrate what kinds of use cases we're talking about here. So looking at the very top line here, I want to focus in on these words, these verbs of things that we do, because it's best to think of it in that way rather than features in the typical sense of what a product can do. So it can help you out with analysis by using natural language to structure and analyze your data. It can help out with design by helping you craft narratives in PowerPoint. It can help out with your communication by coaching you and such. You've been given this in a handout we'll send out with the recordings, but in terms of some ideas for how Copilot can specifically be used to help you out with your engagement in teams, to help you out with your research, to help your writing in Word, but this is the tip of the iceberg, right? If you go to aka.ms/prompt gallery, you'll find a list of prompts to try, and even they are just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to be discovering what makes sense for us to use this for in a day-to-day life, but let's take a closer look at a specific scenario of how you might use Copilot for some different tasks. So in this scenario, I'm an owner of an e-bike retail seller, and I'm planning on opening up a new shop location. So I'm going to use Copilot to help me do some research to identify a promising location. So I'm here in Copilot. You can see that I'm signed in with my work account. See, I have the green check up here. This tells me that enterprise protection is enabled. My conversations here with Copilot are going to stay inside my protected environment. I don't need to worry about our chats showing up on Reddit or being used to train AI models. So I'm going to start by giving Copilot some instructions and some context for our chat. I'm going to ask Copilot to act as a market researcher, and I want to identify promising locations for our new shop in Northeast Grand Rapids suburb. And I also add some more things that I want Copilot to look for. And right away, you'll see that it's identified, 3 locations with the information I've asked for. So hey, this is pretty promising. Yeah, it shows the demographics of things I was asking for, but I want a little more on that. So yeah, let's have Copilot summarize some key demographic and economic data for those locations. So yeah, this here is pretty helpful. Now I've already noticed the dining and grocery stores in the Knapp's Corner area. I know our other stores are in locations like that, so I'm intrigued by that location. But I'd like to know a little more about the competition in that area. So I'm going to ask Copilot let's ask it for a competitive gap analysis. Let's see what, if there are any zones in here that are been underserved by existing e-bike shops. So let's let it work on that for a little bit. Okay, then looks like it's, noting that that saturation in the Knapp's Corner, it's pretty low, and so I'm kind of intrigued by that. But I'd like to kind of just a little more information about our competitors and maybe their proximity to that Knapp's Corner area, which I'm kind of narrowing in on here. So let's give it another instruction here of some specifics about their competitors and their proximity to Knapp's Corner, and get some more data back here. Okay, so there's a site here. It's a couple miles. Another one, yeah. So it's it's kind of confirming my notion here that Knapp's Corner is pretty good. In fact, it's kind of coming back saying, hey, there really aren't any dedicated e-bike retailers directly within Knapp's Corner in that retail zone. So yeah, maybe this is the first area that Knapp's Corner I'm going to maybe focus in on. So next, what I want to do, I'm going to have Copilot draft up a Word doc of a business plan for us opening up a new e-bike store in Knapp's Corner. This includes some location and rationale, the competitive positioning on that. So I'm going to have that work on that for a minute. It's going to create a Word doc that we can then go take and start working more on. You can see it's created that with those sections I asked about. So I'm going to go ahead and just download that Word doc. And then we're going to take that over into Word, and you can see this is the document it created, has those sections that I asked it to do. It's pretty good. It's a good start. But I want to make some adjustments. And if you're working with Copilot right inside Word, you can highlight any particular section and just click on that Copilot icon. You're going to be able to do a little work just on that particular section. But I'm going to grab the whole document because I'm just not really liking the tone here. So I'm going to have Copilot rewrite the entire document, but from the point of view of my company, Adventure E-Bikes. And I want to have it be factual to the point, and then also include some competition, which it didn't do really well in this first go around. So we're going to have Copilot kind of rework this. And you can see it starts to give me the sort of the revised, edited versions here. Yeah, and this is looking pretty good. This is a little more like what I was wanting it to do, a little more from our point of view of my company. So this is pretty good. We'll let it finish up, but it's really rewriting that entire document for me now. All right, so I could ask it to do some more work, but I like it, so I'm just going to actually replace what it had. And boom, now I've got that new kind of updated document. Pretty good start. Now, in the competition area over here, I need a little more, so I'm going to highlight this section that's really just referring to the competitors. And I'm going to ask Copilot again here. Let's write a small paragraph for each competitor. I'm going to focus on the things like the review sentiment and a little more of what their focus is on. So a little more detail than just those original bullet points. You can see that's putting it in here. Still working on that. And that's pretty good. I like that. So I'm just going to go ahead and replace the previous section. Very, very good. So this is great. A lot of work that would take me a lot longer to come up with. One other thing now you can do with Copilot right here inside of Word is I can pull up the sidebar. So I'm going to click the Copilot button in the toolbar, and you'll see I can now chat with Copilot on the side here about this document, not actually working on editing directly like I was doing, but I'm going to have it kind of analyze the competition it's mentioned, and I want it to kind of focus on what it thinks is the most significant competitor for us to focus on. So you can see the reasoning here. We're having a chat about this particular document, and you can see Copilot's kind of determined. They think the REI Grand Rapids competitor is one that stands out, one that we probably should be focusing our attention on. So I'm gonna go back over to my document towards the bottom here. I'm just gonna insert. So I'm gonna tell Copilot, hey, add a section, about doing some, I'm recommending some further investigation or research into our REI Grand Rapids competitor here. I'm gonna have it add a section about this. It's gonna work on that for a minute and add another section here. Not bad, but I'd like this to be a little more direct and urgent. So I'm just going to tell Copilot, try it, basically try again. Let's make that direct and urgent. Have it rewrite that section. And yeah, that's much better. I don't know that you can get much more urgent than that. Immediate need for further research. So great. That's working on it in Word. So now I'm going to pop over to PowerPoint, and we're going to create a presentation, a slide deck that I can use to present this business plan to our stakeholders. So the first way I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a brand new presentation. You can see I've got a theme here. I'm just going to keep the same design that I had open. And I'm just going to ask Copilot, let's create a presentation about this new bike shop in Knapp's Corner. I also want you to focus on the opportunity for us being the first e-bike shop in Knapp's Corner and the favorable competitive environment. So I'll let it work on that for a minute. And this here it's a narrative builder that we have inside of PowerPoint. It allows you to kind of see the kind of the outline of the PowerPoint slides it's going to create. Gives you some sections, and I can work with this. I can move things around. Maybe this strategic business planning section. Maybe let's take that and maybe move that around a bit. I don't like where that's placed, so I can just drag that up a little bit, move that in that section. Could also go to another section that maybe I don't want. You can highlight the trash, just delete that if I want, but I'll keep that. Also, let's add a new topic. So I want to have a topic here about the greater Grand Rapids area and some of the recent growth trends. Let's just add that into the document, into the narrative here. It's going to build another section. Add that topic. Now I can see that's added, and I can move those around still too if I'm not happy with where I like the arrangement. I can see now it's got like 24 slides it's going to build. So we're happy. I'm just going to generate the slides and let Copilot here in the background go ahead and finish creating this full presentation. You can see it's creating slides, putting titles on them. I had a design open in the background when I started this. So if whatever theme or template you have open, when you start working with Copilot, it'll use that. But if you had a company design, a company template, you could apply those. You can always change that later too. But so here we go. It's got some slides built. I could work a little more with Copilot, but I'm liking it for now. I'm going to say keep it. Let's change our view so you can kind of go back to the normal view. You can see what these slides look like. But here you go. It's created a PowerPoint presentation with slides, got some images. This is not too bad. It's pretty good stuff. You see it's going to use a lot of stock imagery here. As I really didn't give it too many instructions. It was pretty much just a quick, simple instruction of building this deck. But if I had specific, maybe unique imagery, I could specify that with Copilot. I can always change those out later. But you can see it's doing a pretty good job here. And like I said, this is kind of generic. You can see these images of Grand Rapids here. That's obviously not Grand Rapids. This kind of looks like maybe Seattle. So I probably would want to maybe change those out, obviously. But good start, great start. to create a document. But the other thing we had is we had that business plan already created in Word. So I'm going to just make a new PowerPoint presentation, but I'm going to reference that business plan document that we created in the previous step, and let's let Copilot kind of start building that. In this case, I'm not really going to work too much here in the narrative builder because it's already using the Word doc that I've been pretty happy with how that's laid out. So I'm pretty good with the arrangement. We're just going to go ahead and let that create the presentation. Again, does those same steps of building the slides, putting in some titles. But again, this time it's using that specific Word document business plan that we created for its reference. So it's going to be tied, really a custom presentation here more for me. Finish up with the design, and we'll go ahead and keep it. And here is our new PowerPoint deck. Let's go back to the normal view. And you can see those sections that we had in our Word document. They're going to follow here the same type of categories, same sections. Again, the imagery, I didn't give it specifics. So again, it's using some kind of generic, stock photos, which I can change. But you'll notice here, it's put in speaker notes. So these speaker notes are coming right from that Word doc already in here for us. And go back down, I can show you that section that I had asked Copilot to add to that document about doing some further research. Here it is. So we got that immediate research priorities on the REI Grand Rapids. So you can see it used that Word document we had before to create this slide deck. So tremendous ability to create things quickly. It would have taken me hours really to create this same scenario. So there are a lot of ways of how you could do certain things with Copilot, but why would you want to, right? You can probably, based on what we've just seen, you can draw some conclusions as to how this would be useful. But let's take a deep dive into the benefits of using Copilot generative AI based off of what we and other players in the industry have seen. And there's data from Microsoft to back this up in the lifetime of Copilot so far, really the past year or more. And they're broadly speaking, you can say that we've seen 4 main pillars of value when it comes to looking at the business benefits of using generative AI like this. And we're going to take a look at each one of these in detail, starting off with saving time. So this is something that obviously is relevant to every person in every single organization, right? Who doesn't want to save 10 hours a month? And incidentally, that 10 hours, it's not a random number taken out of thin air. That is a conclusion from the early access program that Microsoft ran for Copilot with a much more limited feature set than what we have today, what I just showed you. And it was run with both SMB and enterprise companies, and it was 10 hours a month saved on average. Now, that is not you prompting Copilot once and then magically getting 10 hours back. It's the sum of many, many small time saves done on many actions throughout the course of a workday and a work week that add up to an average about 10 hours a month. But the benefit of this is that it's relatively easy to quantify or to estimate, and you can use that together with your average salary from people using Copilot or for your organization to estimate at what point you have broken even on the licensing cost of a Microsoft 365 Copilot license. The important thing with this is that we don't stop at time saved, though, all right? A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that generative AI tools like this, these sort of generative AI systems are there to save you time and not much more. There is a lot more to it, but time saved is a great place to start when evaluating whether something's worth exploring. Let's be a little more specific and look at one scenario. I can imagine some of you relate to this. Being in a meeting with too many people and too many people who are senior and thus whose time is expensive. Because they are highly compensated individuals, and you take 90 minutes out of all of their day, that's a lot of money being spent, especially if you're not all actively involved or they don't actually all need to be there. So there are a few ways you can do this, and I'm giving you this in a handout also that we'll send out. You can look through this, for example, in detail, but it can be things like having people follow a meeting instead of attending it. So you can get Copilot to transcribe a meeting for you, and it'll give you summaries and notes and actions. And you can ask Copilot a bunch of questions about that meeting, follow-up questions about specifics of things that were said in that meeting. And you can also record it, so have more details available. And then you can boil the, that can boil the need for attending that meeting down to maybe just a 5-minute session with Copilot. If the person doing so didn't actually need to be there and interact, they were just there to stay informed. Now let's imagine you have topics that don't actually need discussion. You just want to show people. You want to show these senior people what you've done. You could record a quick video in Microsoft Stream, and you can send that to your stakeholders, and they can use Copilot inside of Microsoft Stream to ask questions about what it is that you said. So besides just watching back the video, they can actually just ask Copilot what your video is about and the details of what it is you said. And you can use Copilot in terms of setting up your meeting admin as well. So you can build an agenda where not everybody needs to be in the whole meeting. You could ask Copilot, hey, I have these people and they're here for this topic. How do I structure an agenda so that they can drop off of the meeting after a certain amount of time has passed? So they can get that rest of their 19 minutes back. And then the beauty of it is that anybody who drops off can actually change their mind later on. No, I actually wanted to see what was said in the rest of the meeting. But I can ask Copilot to update me on what was said in the rest of the meeting. So I don't have to spend another hour attending something that's turned out not to be relevant to me. And if your meetings tend to run long, you can use Copilot to design more efficient meetings by helping out with preparation or shortening of admin by using AI notes, which will take notes and assign actions to attendees in a meeting based on what's said during that meeting. So it cuts down on the meeting admin significantly. So if we just take an average employee cost per year of, let's say, $70,000, and depending on where you are located, maybe your industry, that amount may be significantly more. But let's just use that for our calculations here. With that $30, which as we saw earlier, it's the monthly subscription cost of a Microsoft 365 Copilot license. That $30 is a little less than an hour of an employee's time. So the break-even point is really just under an hour, and you can see the ROI if we can find 2 or 2.5 hours of savings a month. All right, so now we're looking at a pillar of value, which is actually, it's easy to miss in this whole sort of discussion around saving time, and that's that we're not just looking at benefits in terms of quantity of work. We're looking at benefits in terms of quality of work as well. The impact that your work can have and improvements to that quality. Now, this is going to look very different for different people, obviously, because quality means different things to all of us. So discussing this requires a little bit more work in terms of looking at the work that you do or your team does or your department or company does, and in determining what is quality for us. But that's useful to do anyway, and it's going to be very helpful when designing your AI strategy and what you want to achieve. So some examples of how this can work could be being more engaged and professional in meetings. So I have Copilot, transcribing meetings for me, which means I don't need to take notes. So I can be completely focused on the person I'm talking to. I can read their body language, or I can be engaged and don't have to split my attention between speaking to them and taking notes or noting things down. It can be used to find more information, find new angles and perspectives, find things that you missed, that that's going to help you make better decisions. Some general examples that apply to a lot of people, but when you realize this, you are going to realize a real competitive edge for your team and for your business. Not just a way to make yourself more efficient, but to become more effective. So how does this look? And where does that 40% quality come from? Because that seems a little bit too good to be true, right? Well, there was actually a study run by Harvard Business School, which they took 758 consultants from the Boston Consulting Group, and they split them into 3 groups. One group worked manually on set tasks. Another group used GPT-4 to assist them in the same tasks. And then a third group, they had access to GPT-4 and were also given a small amount of training beforehand. And the group which received training and access to an AI assistant, in some cases, performed as well as 40% better in terms of quality of their output. And that quality was determined by grading of their work by a senior consultant at BCG. So that's how you're able to grade quality of the output. There were also other benefits in terms of time and number of tasks completed, but quality is measurable here. Sometimes not as immediately obvious. How do you go about measuring that? So let's take a look at how. You could start exploring what quality means, which is a large topic. But it's worth addressing here because it affects how we can look at AI strategy as well. So quality, fundamentally speaking, it means that we address something that we care about, right? When something addresses something that we care deeply about, then that's one definition of quality. So if we're a decision maker, we care about things like revenue efficiency and growth. And of course, we care about our customers, stakeholders, and employees. If we're looking at it from the point of view of an employee, we can care about our job satisfaction. We care about our work environment, our creative outlet, our career development and such. And if we're good and constructively minded employees, then we care about our stakeholders and customers as well deeply. And we also care about our business and organizations as a whole. And if we're stakeholders, if we're customers, we care about all kinds of things. But they can be things like price. They can be things like responsiveness and engagement of an organization. They can be things, like social and emotional aspects. And so as professionals, we do tasks over the course of a workday that if our organization is operating well, these tasks are aimed at reaching these kinds of outcomes, right? At furthering those kind of outcomes. So depending on what job function we have, we do certain things that aim to further all of these kind of outcomes we just discussed. And if we have good KPIs, good, thoroughly set up, mindfully set up KPIs, and those KPIs actually measure our progress towards these kinds of outcomes. So this is the kind of thing to think about when you're deciding how you're going to measure success in AI. Because working out what quality means to you in a certain function, at a certain department, or for your business as a whole, is going to be important. And once you know what good looks like, once you know what your objective is to boost quality in the context of boosting a certain way of measuring it, then you can start looking for ways to use AI to reach that point. So it's going to look different for each of you, but this is a good place to start. All right, then moving back then to those pillars of value, the third one, and one that's often overlooked, is development of digital skills. And by that, I mean that we lower the thresholds to get into new ways of working that we sometimes avoid, all right? We all probably have something, some kind of workflow or task that we just don't like doing, or maybe that we put off or that we avoid altogether, analysis, research, design, writing. We can raise the skill floor of the entire organization if we give people access to a tool like Copilot, which makes it much easier to get into these things and lowers the barriers of entry to those. So colleagues aren't held back by those kinds of limiting beliefs anymore. And we can all become more well-rounded professionals as a result. If it involves a Microsoft app in any way, there is a way for Copilot to help somebody get into using that app or workflow. And I'm going to give you examples here. We've already looked at some of these already, so you might recognize them. Analysis, writing, design, communication, and engagement. The through line here is that you have an AI assistant to help you out with these kind of workflows here to make them more effective, more efficient, and to help you get into them without a lot of prior knowledge and experience. So instead of looking at knowing formulas and how to write them, you can use Copilot to look them up and analyze data. Instead of writing from scratch with a blank page, you can brainstorm together with Copilot and have something to work off of already. And you can ask for input on how to make your writing better. Instead of starting out with a blank presentation like you saw, it's not, and again, and this is something that's really not recommended by a lot of firms, like McKinsey, the consulting firm. They recommend to all of their consultants that to start their presentations in a tool like Word, because it means you build a narrative that's cohesive, and you don't start off building slide by slide and end up with things that just don't link together well. And then move it over to PowerPoint. You can build off that narrative. Copilot cuts that step out because you can have that narrative builder like we looked at. So you can build something that's pervasive and cohesive and just add in the visuals and make it look nice to fit your theme. And then communication's a big piece. You can interpret emails, especially long email chains. If you've ever been added to a long email chain with just a single line, they said, hey, what do you think about this? And then they give you no more context and expect you to read the entire email chain. Well, no longer. You can just ask Copilot to summarize that email chain. And engagement then, having Copilot take notes for you, running meetings more effectively, asking Copilot live if you need to. If you missed something, you weren't paying attention, or you missed the start of the meeting, it means that you can just be more engaged in that meeting and not spend half of your time sort of trying to mentally catch up. And finally, the fourth pillar of value is culture-based. So culture at work, and we talked about the challenge in the modern workplace with the pace and volume of work that we have. So what would happen if we didn't just have more time, but we had more energy and mental bandwidth to do things during the course of our day? When I spend 3 hours at the start of my day doing something mind-numbing, like something that could be done by AI, I'm not just 3 hours poorer when I'm finished with that task. I've spent a lot of energy. I've spent a lot of bandwidth. I'm less creative. I'm less engaged. I'm less switched on for the rest of the day than if I had not had to do that, or if I didn't have to spend 3 hours doing that. And that means I'm going to have a different sort of output and different outlook and a different kind of job satisfaction compared to, if I have to do these kind of tasks manually all the time. So we're going to end up with more attractive roles with less overhead than we would otherwise. And that number, by the way, in terms of attrition rate, that's taken from the Forrester Total Economic Impact of Copilot study as well. And this is a closer look at those same numbers we looked at before from the Work Trend Index. And the reason behind a lot of them is a lot of people feeling that they can't keep up, is that the vast majority of their time is spent on things like communicating and less of it spent creating. So that's one reason and one of the ways we can address. So we want to address all of these issues, right? These challenges in the workplace. We want to get the benefits of AI. And before you know it, you can bet that somebody has brought up one of the most overused words in all of business today, and that's this. It's the T word. It's transformation. It's a pretty overused term, and far too often we see how professionals and organizations say they want to go through transformation, want to transform their business. But the person saying that, next time you hear somebody say that, think about, does that individual, the person saying these words right now, actually want to transform themselves? Do they actually want to go through that? Or would they rather that things just transform around them, but they themselves don't actually need to change, right? Well, bad news. Transformation, of course, means change, and change can be uncomfortable. But if we want to get all of the benefits that we can get out of developments in technology and the world around us, we need to be open to change. To embracing that change and adopting AI means that we need to change the way we work, and we need to change the way we think about work, not just on a broad sort of widespread organizational level. Individually, me, in the way that I sit down at my computer to do certain things, I need to sort of rewire the way my brain thinks about, the tasks I'm about to do. So that's where we get to AI literacy. This is a different way of looking at a term called AI adoption. And I think literacy is a bit more illustrative of what we mean, because this is, in a lot of ways, like learning a new language. It's a new way of interacting, a new way of getting meaning across, a new way of communicating, in this case with technology. But just like with communicating a different language to a human being, you're going to have to learn a new way of thinking about getting your meaning across. And that's uncomfortable sometimes. If you've ever spent any time abroad in a country that doesn't speak your native language, you know that this can be uncomfortable. But you'll also know that once you learn that language, it's going to open up a whole new world for you in that environment. And you'll also know, most likely, that you can spend years and years and years studying theory about a language, learning it in terms of book smarts, but things are never going to click for you completely unless you interact with other people in the language we use that's hands-on and you actually use it in a context. You might also know that if you've never spent time learning a language, if you've ever spent time learning a language together with other people who are also learning that language and actively using it, that's when you supercharge that development, because you can support each other. You can give each other feedback, and you give each other ideas. And then finally, putting yourself out there, putting yourself in a context where you have to sink or swim, that makes a huge difference. Just like going to a party with people who don't speak your native language, that can be real challenging as an experience, but it's going to make you grow so much and develop so much by doing so. Getting out of your comfort zone and challenging your set of habits of doing things is very beneficial when you're learning literacy in a new language, or AI in this case. So how can this look? How do we get from where we are now to the point where we are all literate in AI? Well, step one is going to be assembling your team. Because if you're using Microsoft 365 Copilot, you're going to have to start somewhere. It's more likely not going to be your entire organization all at once, but people very easily make the mistake here of buying one license, assigning it to your CEO, and then thinking that's going to work itself out. I don't know how many CEOs we have on the session, but if somebody just gave you a license, you're probably not going to have time to look into that and gather serious insights on how that worked, especially considering you're working on your own. And let's be honest, nobody's holding that CEO accountable for that, because that CEO has many other things they're being held accountable for. Instead, the successful adopters of AI and Copilot so far, they've been the ones that have developed Copilot or deployed Copilot to a whole department, or at very least to a whole team of people who have workflows that they share. So they do similar things day to day. They use similar tools, similar flows and tasks, so they can share ideas with each other. They can bounce ideas. They can give each other feedback. They can hold each other accountable. And then that team as a whole are the ones who are accountable for showing what they've found. So what we want to do, to get off on the right foot, is to generate a positive feedback loop where the team gets ideas for things to try with Copilot. Because again, it's an open-ended tool. They're going to need to do some experimentation to see what works for them in their context, and then find different ways of doing the same thing. That's why it's so useful to have multiple people in the same role doing the same thing, because you're going to come up with different approaches of prompting and different approaches of doing that task. So together, they're going to find out use cases, or they're going to share those use cases. They're going to get inspiration, and they're going to generate new ideas. So let's take a look at how that works step by step. Number one is to explore. You see how Copilot works, and Copilot, it works in every single task and workflow that you have. Now, it would be silly to expect anybody to use Copilot every single time they do every single task, but give Copilot a fair shot. Ideally, many fair tries at every task. Not every time you do them, but don't leave any tasks out. Challenge yourself to think, could I use Copilot in this context to help me be more efficient, more effective, to help me get something done that I've been avoiding? Or can I use it in a way that benefits me or my organization or my sort of workplace culture? Experiment with those, see what works. And then you share those ideas, together in the team, and you collaborate. You find ways to implement them. You share ideas and doing the same kind of tasks, and you find what works for you in the team. And the benefit of being a team is that once you found something that works, you as a team lead, or as the lead of, for this pilot project, can decide, that, hey, guys, we are now going to do this every time. Every time we're following up or summarizing a customer meeting, we're going to use Copilot to grab the transcript from that meeting, and we're going to feed it into our CRM system in this way, for example. And that's going to generate real world use cases for your organization, for your team, for your way of working in your context that you can share. And we highly recommend sharing those success stories internally with your entire organization. So, if you're a leader, if you're a people leader, if you're an executive, if you're a decision maker listening to this, give your AI champions the stage. Give them a slot during your company meeting or your all hands on meeting. Put them up on stage and share their latest innovations from the AI team. It's going to give them a lot of positive recognition from you and from the entire organization. which is going to motivate them. They're going to stay on track and keep generating real life valuable use cases. It'll hold them accountable for keeping that up. And it's going to inspire other people in your organization, which is going to keep this loop going, all right? Because those people are going to see those ideas and those use cases, and they're going to have potentially new ideas or suggestions to provide to that pilot team. And they'll say, hey, AI champions, have you tried doing this? Does this work, or does this other thing work? Because I had the idea when you showed this use case that maybe you could do this other thing as well. And so you really kind of crowdsource, that idea. You use the entire creativity of your whole organization to come up with ideas for the AI team to test out. And the good news is we talked about Copilot Chat before, which means that everybody in that audience can join in. They don't have to feel entirely left out. They can use that web-grounded Copilot Chat to do things like generate job descriptions or to generate marketing copy, things like more limited use cases that still mean that they can join in and feel involved in generating new ideas and use cases. So that's the cycle we want to build. All right, so we've covered what Microsoft 365 Copilot is, how it's changing the way we work, and what it means for your business. But the real question now is, what's next? And that's where our AI launch program comes in. We designed it to help organizations like yours adopt AI quickly and confidently. Through the program, we'll help you define clear AI use policies that are tailored for your business. We'll make sure your Microsoft 365 environment is secure and compliant. And we'll deliver hands-on training using real-world scenarios so your team doesn't just learn about Copilot, they actually start using it. And just as important, we'll support your early adoption efforts so you can start seeing value from day one. So if you're ready to take the next step, just scan the QR code on the screen or head to trailheadit.com/launch to learn more. We'd love to help you get started. So all right, that's all I have for you. Hey, thanks everyone for joining me today. I appreciate you taking precious time out of your day. I know we had a lot to cover, and I appreciate you all hanging in there with me. So go out and make it a great rest of the day.